Hello everyone. Welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, to stop the rampaging Milim, Rimuru and Guy hurriedly ventured to the snow-covered lands. However, upon their arrival, they found that the enemy commander Feldway had already taken control of Milim, commanding her to destroy Sarian's divine tree. Meanwhile, in Sarian, under Benimaru's command, Rimuru's side gradually gained the upper hand in the battle. Benimaru, Sylvia, Kigali and Tia managed to temporarily suppress Ciel, while Leon and Souei joined forces to confront one of the seven angels of origin, Zalario. In this episode, we will witness Rimuru and Feldway's efforts to stop Milim, and Rimuru will receive unexpected assistance from none other than Zalario. As Zalario's discontent with Feldway grows, Ciel showcases her extraordinary abilities, helping Zalario break free from the control of the Lord of Justice. Ciel also grants both Leon and Zalario even greater power. In this episode, Zalario, as one of Veldanava's subordinates, begins to harbor significant doubts about Rimuru's true identity. So, let's get started. Shifting focus to Leon, he expressed his displeasure at Zalario for daring to observe other parts of the battlefield while fighting him, clearly a sign of underestimation. As their sword energies clashed, Leon calmly stated the facts, while Zalario responded with a wry smile. Zalario remarked that since their techniques were evenly matched, the one who loses focus first would fail, so he would never underestimate Leon and Souei. As he spoke, Zalario effortlessly deflected Leon's attacks. Zalario was a very composed and strong warrior. He understood that when swordsmen were of the same level, victory often hinged on using feints to mislead the opponent and create openings. Therefore, rather than forcing an attack and risking a counterstrike, distracting the opponent with words was much more effective. Moreover, Zalario was not facing just one opponent. The elusive Souei, lurking in the shadows, was equally troublesome, always striking when Zalario was most distracted. Even though Souei was much weaker, Zalario couldn't afford to be careless. Leon also saw through Zalario's tactics. He wanted to finish the fight with a decisive blow the moment his opponent showed a weakness, but with Zalario, that opportunity seemed unlikely to come. If the stalemate continued, it would inevitably turn into a drawn-out battle. In this situation, Leon and Souei, who had weaker overall abilities, would be at a disadvantage. Thus, even though Leon's skills were on par with Zalario's, he was gradually losing his composure. Just then, Souei quickly approached Leon, emerging from the shadows to remind him to stay calm and not be swayed by the opponent's words. Following this, Souei launched a seemingly reckless attack on Zalario, only to be struck down with a single blow. Of course, this was Souei's parallel existence. Whenever Leon showed signs of fatigue, Souei would step into attack, helping to reset the momentum and minimize Leon's exhaustion. Thus, the battle between the two sides reached a deadlock. In the midst of this tense situation, Benimaru seemed to receive some information and suddenly sprang into action. He requested Almesia to hand over the command of the Magus army to him. Hearing this, even Leon and Zalario, who were in the middle of their fight, looked at Benimaru with curiosity. After all, the Magus was Sarian's most elite force. How could they easily entrust it to a military leader from another country? Almesia also looked hesitant, but Benimaru insisted that he understood the difficulty of his request, yet he had just received an order from Rimuru-sama. He explained that Milim was rapidly approaching the divine tree, and Rimuru-sama had made it clear that they must find a way to stop her, or it would result in a disaster beyond imagination. Upon hearing Benimaru's words, Almesia confirmed that this was indeed Rimuru's order. Despite her reluctance, Almesia acknowledged that if Rimuru had made such a request, they had no choice but to comply. Saying this, she actually began summoning the various commanders of the Magus army. Seeing this unfold, even Zalario was utterly astonished, remarking that this was incredibly reckless. However, Leon responded that if it was Rimuru's command, such actions were to be expected. Yet, Leon also admitted that he couldn't fully understand Rimuru's intentions. Strangely, despite being enemies, Leon and Zalario found common ground in their mutual bewilderment over the same issue. Zalario then reflected on the situation, realizing that this commander named Benimaru was trying to juggle handling a powerful opponent like Ciel, while also orchestrating something else entirely. As if in response to Zalario's thoughts, Benimaru used his ability to project an image of the distant battlefield into the air. Zalario was taken aback by this skill, and Souei, sensing Zalario's surprise, explained that Benimaru had adapted Rimuru-sama's creative magic, Eye of God, utilizing the principles of mirages to produce the image. Although the three were still engaged in combat, they unexpectedly began conversing amidst their battle. In the projected image, Rimuru was seen trying to intercept the rapidly advancing Milim, while Guy was engaged in a battle with Velzard. Moreover, for some reason, the scorched dragon Velgrind had also appeared on the battlefield, working to mitigate the impact of various attacks on the surrounding area. Seeing this, Leon couldn't help but comment on how even Velgrind had been somehow coaxed by Rimuru into joining the battlefield. Souei immediately retorted, saying that it was a testament to Rimuru-sama's extraordinary charisma. Meanwhile, Zalario expressed great confusion about the situation shown in the projected image. He couldn't fathom why Milim was about to attack Sarian. Was this part of some grand plan, an accidental occurrence, or perhaps Velzard acting on her own? Of course, if Feldway had influenced Velzard in some way, that could explain the situation. But if that were the case, what exactly was Feldway's objective? Zalario found himself deep in thought. Zalario's speculation was that Velzard had somehow provoked Milim, causing her to go on a rampage, which would lead to endless destruction. If that were the case, it would make sense that Guy would take action to stop Milim, potentially putting himself in a vulnerable position. It was as if Velzard was trying to lure Guy out. Even with Guy's formidable power, fighting Milim would require him to use all his strength. Velzard could then take advantage of this opportunity to defeat Guy and force him into submission. If Velzard's motive was so straightforward, then Guy wouldn't simply rush in to stop Milim. He would likely seek out allies first. This would make Rimuru's involvement in the battle predictable. It's important to note that this was just Zalario's conjecture, and while the process was flawed, the outcome he predicted was surprisingly accurate. Up to this point, Zalario could understand the chain of events. The problem arose when he considered why they would shift the battlefield, and why they would do so in Sarian, where Zalario himself was leading the attack. Clearly, these people were not reinforcements. Zalario's dissatisfaction grew as he couldn't understand Feldway's intentions. The more he struggled to find an answer, the more his frustration with Feldway grew. As the leader, Feldway should have clearly explained the plan. Now, with Milim's uncontrollable assault, it was unclear whether Zalario's forces were supposed to assist or avoid her. Without clear directives, how could they effectively fight? Zalario carefully reconsidered everything, trying to avoid misunderstanding Feldway. He thought that if Sarian's defense only consisted of Sylvia and Elmesia, then he and Jahil should have been sufficient to handle them. So perhaps Feldway had anticipated that Rimuru would send reinforcements, prompting him to bring Milim as additional support. But Zalario quickly dismissed this idea. If that were the case, Feldway could have simply sent Milim from the beginning. After all, a rampaging Milim was unstoppable by anyone, and it would have been the perfect opportunity for Zalario and the others to launch an attack amidst the chaos. Therefore, Feldway must have had a specific reason for allowing the battle in Sarian to unfold first, only bringing Milim afterward. This way, everyone would be preoccupied with fighting, leaving no one with the strength to interfere with Milim. With this realization, Zalario abruptly turned to gaze at the ancient, towering divine tree, a sacred relic that had stood since ancient times, tasked with the mission of protecting the world from all calamities. Thousands of years ago, when Guy and Milim engaged in their epic battle, the north was guarded by Velzard, the human realms of the western nations were protected by Guy and Ramaris, the eastern empire had the safeguarding presence of Rudra and Velgrind, and Sarian was under the protection of this divine tree. The reason why that monumental battle caused irreparable damage only at its core area was precisely because of these protective forces. Indeed, the world was safeguarded by divine entities, and to destroy it, one would need to overcome multiple barriers. For example, Gi, though perceived as an evil demon lord by humans, has strictly adhered to the agreement made with the creator god Veldanava, maintaining the balance of the world. Similarly, Ramrus, and other demon lords, as well as true heroes, all protect the world in their own ways. Additionally, there were holy relics created by god Veldanava, like the Heaven Tower, and this divine tree was another such relic. Zalario understood that Feldway's plan to resurrect Veldanava-sama essentially failed the moment Michael died. So, as a fallback, Feldway's objective might very well be the destruction of the world, believing that such an act would force the creator god to intervene and punish him. As Zalario realized this, a shiver ran down his spine. If he were Feldway, then aside from the divine tree, the only other holy relic left in the world would be the Heaven Tower. While Ramrus's labyrinth might also be considered a relic, it could be treated as an exception. As for the demon lords and heroes, Gi was currently engaged with Velzard, Rimuru was desperately trying to stop Milim, Masayuki and Chloe were in recovery and likely unable to act. Veldrind was active, but her parallel existence lacked full strength and was focused on minimizing the collateral damage to the world, so she posed no real threat. Veldora, having already discerned Feldway's intentions, was hiding deep within the labyrinth and unable to move freely. If Feldway's goal truly was to destroy the world, then everything was indeed proceeding according to plan. Zalario didn't have a destructive personality. To be honest, if Feldway wanted to die, he could do so on his own. Even though they were friends, Zalario had no intention of joining him in the destruction of the world. Zalario believed that, as a friend, he had to stop Feldway from doing something so foolish. It's important to note that everything described above is purely Zalario's speculation based on the current situation. Zalario couldn't prove that his assumptions were correct. Even with the information provided in the novel, it's not certain that Feldway truly intends to destroy the world. However, Zalario believed it was better to act according to this worst-case scenario. If he were wrong, it would be due to Feldway's lack of effective communication beforehand. With this in mind, Zalario looked at Benimaru, who had completely taken control of the Magus army. Not only was Benimaru deftly handling Jahil, but he also effectively commanded the Magus as soon as he took over, which earned Zalario's admiration. In comparison, Jahil seemed like a reckless, insignificant figure. Zalario already had little regard for Jahil, but now he was particularly impressed with Benimaru, the enemy's commander. Coupled with his growing discontent and concern over Feldway's erratic actions, Zalario made a bold decision. He started talking to Leon and Souei, expressing that they likely understood he was currently under a form of control. Although he still had some degree of freedom, the control that Michael had left behind was still deeply embedded. Since Leon had also been controlled before, he quickly grasped Zalario's intention. Indeed, Zalario was hoping that Leon and the others would help him break free from the control of the Lord of Justice. Switching back to Benimaru's perspective, the Magus, initially dissatisfied, understood the situation after witnessing Milim's destructive power that could evaporate mountains and rivers. They decided to follow Benimaru's lead. Benimaru was deep in thought. In the image, Rimuru-sama had already caught Milim's attention, and Veldrind was helping to mitigate the collateral damage. However, they could only manage the aftermath of Milim's next attack, not redirect its course. Benimaru's orders were to gather all available forces and, at the critical moment, distract Milim, just for a split second. Benimaru noticed that Rimuru-sama didn't seem entirely confident, but he had unwavering faith in Rimuru. Just like in countless previous instances, Rimuru-sama might express doubt, but in the end, things always turned out for the best. Benimaru knew that he had to fulfill the task Rimuru had entrusted to him. Returning to Rimuru's perspective, although Sarian was still some distance away, the divine tree was already visible, a testament to its immense size. However, no matter how large it was, it might not withstand even a single attack from Milim. Rimuru had witnessed the devastating power of Milim's attacks many times on the way to Sarian. The fact that the planet hadn't sustained significant damage was largely thanks to Veldgrind's assistance. After leaving a parallel existence with Masayuki, Velgrind had rushed over to help. Though this version of Velgrind only had 70% of her full strength, Rimuru was immensely grateful for her presence. Rimuru tentatively asked Velgrind if she had any way to protect the divine tree as well. As expected, Velgrind retorted that Rimuru hadn't grown up at all and was still as naive as ever. She explained that Milim wasn't even using her full power, and even so, Velgrind could barely maintain the protective barrier, star barrier. Velgrind emphasized that if Milim decided to unleash her full strength and control the star particle, no barrier could withstand her Drago Nova. Velgrind cast a sideways glance at Rimuru, causing his heart to race. Rimuru mentioned that he had heard of Drago Nova being reflected before, but Velgrind quickly dismissed this, explaining that Milim usually held back in fights. The star particle was not something that could be reflected. Perhaps because Milim was used to controlling her power in battles, even in her current berserk state, she might still be subconsciously holding back. However, they couldn't count on her remaining in that state indefinitely. The conclusion was clear: they had to break Feldway's control over Milim before she unleashed a full-strength Drago Nova. Ciel's strategy was to gather all their forces and launch a coordinated attack to distract Milim, creating an opening for Rimuru to break Feldway's control. The reason Ciel didn't opt to have Velgrind attack Milim to create this distraction was that such an approach would likely cause excessive damage. Velgrind's power was better utilized in maintaining the protective barrier to minimize the harm Milim's attacks inflicted on the planet's surface. At that moment, Ciel delivered some good news. She had identified a factor that could increase their chances of success. Ciel had detected the presence of Leon and Zalario on the battlefield and planned to invite them to cooperate in the effort. She asked Rimuru for permission to proceed with this plan. Rimuru trusted Ciel, though slightly uncertain about how Zalario, an enemy rather than an ally, would react. Ciel reassured him, expressing confidence that Zalario would agree to help. Though Rimuru didn't fully understand why Ciel was so confident, given the urgency of the situation, he promptly gave his approval. Shifting perspective to Zalario, his plan to break free from control involved having Leon and Souei attack him with their full strength, thereby creating enough strain on Zalario. He intended to use the exertion from activating his ultimate skill to analyze how Feldway's ultimate dominion was influencing him and find a way to break free from it. However, just as they were preparing to commence the battle, they heard an inexplicable voice. Yes, it was Ciel once again. Ciel informed Zalario and Leon that she had overheard their conversation, and if they agreed, she could modify their angelic ultimate skills to a state where they would be immune to any external influence. To Leon and Zalario, Ciel's voice was utterly baffling and seemed incredibly far-fetched. The two exchanged confused glances, realizing that neither of them was behind this sudden voice, and they began to consider how to respond. Leon quickly came to the conclusion that the only person who could pull off something like this was likely Rimuru. Although he didn't fully understand how Rimuru was capable of such feats, trying to figure it out now seemed pointless. After all, Rimuru had already removed the control circuit from his Lord of Purity, so performing other miraculous acts didn't seem out of the question. Among the demon lords, there was already a consensus that Rimuru was a being beyond common sense. With that in mind, Leon decided to go along with the plan. On the other hand, Zalario, though maintaining a calm exterior, was internally thrown into turmoil. As a spiritual entity, his core was highly resistant to interference, and he constantly kept his defenses against mental attacks active. Yet now, someone who wasn't even present was speaking directly to his mind, claiming they could modify his ultimate skill. Zalario had mentally prepared himself to face potential dangers in his quest to break free from control, but the voice's casual tone made his preparation seem almost laughable. Skeptical, Zalario responded to the voice, asking what it required of him, and what the voice stood to gain from this proposal. The voice replied that all it needed was for Zalario to do a small favor, simply follow its instructions and attack with all his might. It was a very simple task. Upon hearing this proposal, which seemed to have no downsides for him, Zalario should have been more suspicious. However, for some reason, the offer made his heart feel surprisingly at ease. Without much hesitation, Zalario agreed to the terms, and thus the contract was established. Ciel's voice echoed once more, confirming the agreement and announcing the initiation of the skill alternation. What followed was Ciel's moment to shine. After a series of operations, Leon's ultimate skill, Lord of Purity, evolved into the superior Lord of Brilliance, while Zalario's ultimate skill, Lord of Trials, transformed into Lord of Retribution. Feeling the chains that had been binding him fall away, Zalario found himself overwhelmed with confusion. He had been prepared to lose his ultimate skill entirely in order to break free from control, yet not only had it not disappeared, but it had also become even more powerful. Zalario's original Lord of Trials was a space manipulation ability that allowed him to manage the flow of all substances and wavelengths within his domain, excluding special particles like infon and star particle. This meant that even Leon's particle disintegration had no effect on Zalario. Now, with Lord of Retribution, Zalario could manipulate matter and wavelengths at will, significantly enhancing his combat capabilities. Zalario, who was naturally inclined to overthink, found his mind spiraling into deeper contemplation. In this episode, his brain seemed to never stop processing. Zalario hadn't agreed to become an ally of the mysterious voice, so why had he been granted such immense power? No, that wasn't the main issue. Zalario's confusion only grew. Ultimate skills were the pinnacle of abilities in this world, incredibly difficult to obtain, and now one had been casually rewritten. How could such a thing be possible? If someone could accomplish this, Zalario suddenly paused. Ultimate skills were part of the system created by Veldanava-sama to manage the world, and obtaining one meant gaining a portion of the world's governing authority. If there was an entity capable of freely altering this system, wouldn't that be akin to possessing godlike power? It would mean the ability to rewrite the laws of the world itself. Zalario began to tremble at the thought. What kind of being could do such a thing? At that moment, Leon's calm voice broke through his thoughts, stating matter-of-factly that this was the work of Rimuru. Zalario was shocked and expressed disbelief, wondering if all of this was accomplished by Demon Lord Rimuru, with an expression of astonishment in his eyes. Leon responded that there was no need to overthink it, that was simply the way things were. Zalario, on the verge of hysteria, shouted that it was impossible not to overthink this. It was all too bizarre from start to finish. Seeing the knowing look in Leon's eyes, Zalario realized that these beings had likely already experienced countless extraordinary events. At this moment, Souei interjected, saying that both Leon and Zalario were being too disrespectful towards Rimuru-sama. Not fully aware of what had transpired between them, Souei assumed they might be speaking ill of Rimuru-sama. Zalario replied that Souei's master was simply too far removed from common sense. Leon nodded in agreement, and once again, an unexpected sense of camaraderie formed between the two. Deciding to test each other's strength, they resumed their battle while awaiting further orders from that mysterious voice. Returning to Rimuru's perspective, upon hearing Ciel's report that she had successfully dealt with Leon and Zalario, Rimuru felt equally perplexed. Leon was one thing, but Zalario was an enemy. What could Ciel have possibly done to get him to cooperate? Ciel explained that it was actually quite simple. She had analyzed the Lord of Justice ability, which included the ultimate dominion that could fully control angelic powers. Ciel merely utilized this ability to her advantage. With this explanation, Rimuru recalled that while this ability was incredibly troublesome when used by the enemy, it could be extremely convenient when wielded by an ally. Ciel had leveraged ultimate dominion to establish the negotiation and then took the opportunity to play around with Leon's and Zalario's abilities. Alright, that's all for this video. Zalario's strength is undeniable. In this episode, even while his mind was racing with thoughts, he still managed to handle Leon's and Souei's full-force attacks with ease, maintaining an advantage. This alone is enough to demonstrate his power. As a subordinate of Veldanava, Zalario has a deep understanding of the world's governing laws. This strongly suggests that Rimuru possesses a power on par with that of the Creator God. While the novel hasn't yet provided further details about Zalario's perspective, It's fascinating to think about how he views Rimuru now that he realizes Rimuru can rewrite the world's rules. The next episode will be the final one for Volume 20 of the TenSura novel. The skill Imaginary Supply will make its first appearance in the novel, and this ability will become crucial in Volume 21. In our next episode, we'll see how Benimaru, Zalario, Leon, Souei, and others coordinate with Rimuru to break Milim's control. We'll also learn why Veldora appeared on Luminous Battlefield. Even though Milim's control would be broken, she remained in a berserk state, and during the ensuing struggle, Rimuru once again fell prey to Feldway's schemes, leading to his banishment to the ends of time and space. The next episode promises to be very exciting. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.